The mansion never truly slept, not even in the quiet hours when the city outside softened into distant lights and muted sirens. Its corridors held a constant, watchful stillness, as if the walls themselves were listening. Elena moved carefully through those corridors, pushing a polished cart ahead of her, her footsteps almost silent against the marble floor. She had learned to walk that way, soft, invisible, forgettable. Her eyes stayed lowered, never lingering on the art that lined the walls or the chandeliers that glowed like frozen sunlight. Tonight, though, every movement felt heavier. Her left wrist throbbed relentlessly, a deep, pulsing pain that radiated up her arm and into her shoulder. She had wrapped it tightly before coming to work, layers of cloth hidden beneath the sleeve of her uniform, hoping the pressure would dull the ache. It didn't. Each time she lifted a glass, wiped a surface, or adjusted a chair, pain flared sharp and hot, forcing her to clench her teeth to keep from gasping. She told herself it would pass. It always did. She couldn't afford weakness here. Not in this house. She cleaned the long dining table, reflections of crystal and gold trembling beneath her cloth. Her fingers shook despite her effort to steady them. She switched hands instinctively, then winced as the injured wrist brushed the table's edge. A small sound escaped her before she could stop it. She froze, heart pounding, listening. Silence answered her, thick and heavy. Slowly, she exhaled and continued working, though sweat had begun to form at her temples. She was almost finished when she felt it, that subtle change in the air, the sense of being observed. It crawled up her spine, tightening her shoulders. Elena did not turn right away. Experience told her that sudden movements drew attention. She finished wiping the last place setting, straightened the silverware with trembling precision, and only then lifted her gaze. Victor Morano stood near the doorway, as if he had always been there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that looked effortless on him, like an extension of his body rather than clothing. One hand rested casually in his pocket, the other held a glass of amber liquid that caught the light. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, alert, missing nothing. Fear washed over Elena in a cold wave. She immediately lowered her head and stepped back from the table, hands clasped in front of her, instinctively positioning her injured wrist behind the other. "Good evening, sir," she murmured, barely audible. Victor did not respond right away. He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze moving over the room, then settling back on her. The silence stretched, making Elena's pulse roar in her ears. She felt her wrist swell further, the tight wrapping pressing painfully into her skin. She prayed he would dismiss her, look past her the way powerful men often did. But Victor's eyes lingered on small details, how she favored one arm, how her shoulders tilted ever so slightly to protect it, how her sleeve hung stiff and unnatural. He had seen men lie with their mouths, their eyes, their entire bodies. He recognized pain when it tried to hide. "What's your name?" he asked finally, his voice low, even, without threat or warmth. "Elena, sir," she replied, her throat dry. "How long have you worked here, Elena?" His tone was conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "Almost a year," she said, tightening her grip on her own fingers. That he nodded once, as if filing the information away. His gaze dropped briefly, then returned to her face. "You're injured." The words hit her harder than a shout would have. Her heart lurched. "No, sir," she said quickly, too quickly. "I'm fine." Victor tilted his head slightly, studying her the way one might examine a crack in glass. "You're not," he said calmly. "Show me." Her breath caught. Fear rooted her to the floor. Showing him meant questions. Questions meant trouble. Trouble was something she could not survive. "Please," she whispered. "It's nothing." He took one step closer. Not aggressive, not rushed, just closer. The distance between them shrank, and the room seemed to tighten around her. "I don't like being lied to," he said quietly. "Especially poorly." Her hands trembled. Slowly, reluctantly, she reached for the cuff of her sleeve. Each second felt like an hour. She pulled the fabric back just enough. The sight was impossible to miss. Her wrist was swollen and discolored, bruises blooming dark purple and yellow, the joint bent at a wrong, painful angle. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence felt dangerous, heavy with restrained force. "Who did this?" he asked. Elena shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "It was my fault," she said, the words automatic, rehearsed from years of necessity. "I fell." Victor's gaze remained fixed on the injury, then lifted slowly to meet her eyes. Something cold and controlled flickered there. He straightened, stepping back, restoring the distance. "Go home," he said. She blinked, confused. "Sir." "Now," he repeated. "A car will take you. You won't work tonight." Fear mixed with disbelief. I I can finish." "That wasn't a request," he said, voice still calm, but final. Elena nodded quickly, bowing her head as she backed away. As she left the room, her heart raced with confusion and dread. She did not know that, in noticing her pain, the most dangerous man in the city had already decided something irreversible. The car ride home felt unreal, like a dream stitched together from fear and exhaustion. Elena sat stiffly in the back seat of the black sedan, her injured wrist cradled against her chest, watching the city lights slide past the window in long, blurred streaks. The driver said nothing, eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. That silence frightened her more than questions would have. She kept replaying Victor Morano's voice in her mind. Calm, controlled, final. Men like him didn't notice people like her. They certainly didn't send them home early with a private driver. Something about it felt wrong, like the quiet before a storm. When the car stopped in front of her apartment building, the driver simply opened the door and nodded. "Take care," he said, as if this were an ordinary courtesy. Elena stepped out, her legs weak, and watched the car disappear into the night before turning toward the dark stairwell. Inside, the apartment was dim and cold. The single bulb flickered as she turned it on. The familiar smell of old paint and damp concrete wrapped around her, grounding her in reality. Her brother, Tomas, was asleep on the couch, his work boots still on, exhaustion etched into his young face. Elena's chest tightened. She moved quietly, careful not to wake him, and sank into the chair beside the small table. Only then did she allow herself to loosen the cloth around her wrist. Pain flared instantly, sharp and unforgiving. She bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. As she rewrapped it, tears finally spilled, silent and hot, dripping onto the fabric. She wasn't just crying from pain. She was crying from fear of what tomorrow might bring. People like Victor Morano did not intervene without reason. And reasons, in his world, often came with consequences. Across the city, Victor sat alone in his study, the mansion eerily quiet around him. The room smelled faintly of leather and whiskey, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls. He stood by the window, looking down at the city that stretched endlessly below, alive with movement even at this hour. In his hand, he held a phone, listening without speaking as Marco's voice came through on the other end. Information flowed in smoothly, efficiently. An address, a name, a pattern of behavior. Victor closed his eyes briefly as the pieces fell into place. The injury wasn't an accident. It never was. He had seen too many broken people in his life to mistake fear for clumsiness. He ended the call and set the phone down slowly, his jaw tightening. Memories surfaced uninvited, his own childhood, the way power had been used against the weak, the way silence had been demanded and enforced. He had built his empire on control, on ensuring that chaos bowed before him. Yet there were lines, invisible but absolute, that once crossed required correction. He did not rage. Rage was careless. Instead, he moved with precision. He picked up his jacket, slid his arms into the sleeves, and left the study without waking the house. The guards at the gate straightened as he passed, surprise flickering briefly across their faces. He waved them off. Tonight was not a night for witnesses. The building Elena lived in was exactly what he had expected. Narrow, neglected, pressed between newer structures like an unwanted reminder of a forgotten past. Victor entered without knocking, his presence alone enough to quiet the hallway. He climbed the stairs with unhurried steps, stopping at a door marked by peeling paint and cheap metal numbers. Inside, the landlord was counting money at a small table, a bottle of liquor nearby. He looked up, irritation flashing across his face, then draining away as recognition dawned. Fear followed swiftly, raw and naked. Victor did not sit. He did not smile. He spoke softly, explaining exactly why he was there, exactly what behavior would no longer be tolerated. The landlord tried to laugh it off, to excuse himself, to shift blame. Victor listened patiently. When he acted, it was quick and controlled, a precise demonstration of consequences that left no room for misunderstanding. He did not kill the man. Death was too simple. He left him alive, broken in ways that would be remembered every day. By the time Victor stepped back into the night, the sky was beginning to lighten, the city preparing to wake. He made another call from the car, this one to a private medical clinic that owed him favors. Arrangements were made. Names were omitted. Payment was handled without discussion. He leaned back against the seat, eyes closed, as the car carried him home. He did not feel satisfaction, only a cold sense of balance restored. Morning came too quickly for Elena. She barely slept, waking repeatedly from shallow dreams filled with faceless men and closed doors. When a knock sounded at her apartment just after sunrise, her heart leapt into her throat. Tomas stirred, confused. Elena opened the door with shaking hands to find a woman in a neat coat standing beside a familiar driver. "You're coming with us," the woman said gently. "Doctor's appointment." Elena tried to protest, but the words died in her mouth. An hour later, she sat in a clean, bright clinic as a doctor examined her wrist carefully, speaking in calm tones, explaining fractures and healing time. A splint was applied, pain medication prescribed. When Elena asked about payment, the doctor smiled kindly. "It's already been taken care of." Back at the mansion, staff whispered as Victor returned, composed as ever, taking his coffee as if nothing unusual had happened. But by the time Elena arrived later that morning, her wrist properly treated, escorted once again by a black sedan, everyone sensed it. Something had shifted. No one knew exactly what the boss had done. They only knew that by morning, the consequences of hiding pain had rippled outward, unseen but undeniable. Elena returned to the mansion later that day with a mixture of gratitude and unease twisting in her chest. The familiar iron gates opened silently, the guards offering polite nods that felt strangely respectful now, as if wordless instructions had been passed along. Her wrist was secured in a clean splint beneath her sleeve, the pain dulled but still present, a constant reminder of how quickly life could fracture. As she stepped inside, the air felt different. The house was just as grand, just as polished, yet the weight she had always carried on her shoulders seemed lighter, as though something unseen had been lifted. Still, fear lingered. She did not know what Victor Morano expected of her now, or what price would eventually be demanded. Kindness from men like him was rarely free. She resumed her work quietly, moving carefully, adjusting to her limited grip. Other staff watched her with curiosity masked as indifference. No one asked questions. In this house, curiosity was dangerous. Elena kept her head down, focusing on small, ordinary tasks, straightening cushions, wiping shelves, arranging flowers. Each completed motion felt like proof that she still belonged here, that she had not become a liability. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to the night before, to the landlord's door opening, to Victor's calm voice telling her to go home. The contrast confused her. She had expected punishment, anger, dismissal. Instead, she had received protection. It unsettled her more than cruelty would have. Victor observed from a distance. He stood in the upper gallery, hands resting lightly on the railing, watching Elena move through the room below. He noted how she favored her injured wrist, how she paused when pain flared, how she refused help even when it was offered. There was resilience there, quiet and unassuming. It reminded him of people he had known long ago, before power had hardened him, before survival demanded ruthlessness. He turned away before the feeling could linger. Sentiment was a weakness he could not afford. Later that afternoon, he summoned her. The message was delivered simply. The boss wanted to see her. Elena's heart pounded as she followed the guard to Victor's private office. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Victor sat behind his desk, papers neatly arranged, sunlight filtering through tall windows behind him. He gestured to the chair opposite. "Sit," he said. She did, carefully. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. Victor's gaze fell briefly on her splint. "The doctor was satisfactory?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Elena replied. "Thank you." Her voice shook despite her effort to steady it. He nodded once. "You'll be on light duty for a while," he said. "No heavy lifting. No strain." The words sounded like an order, not a suggestion. She nodded quickly, relief and confusion mingling. Victor leaned back slightly, studying her face. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. She swallowed. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," she said honestly. "It never does." Something passed through his eyes then, an emotion quickly buried. He did not argue. He did not comfort her. Instead, he reached for a folder on his desk and slid it across to her. Elena hesitated before opening it. Inside were documents she did not fully understand at first: school enrollment forms, tuition receipts, transportation arrangements. Her breath caught as she recognized her brother's name. "Sir," she whispered, looking up in disbelief. "He's young," Victor said evenly. "He shouldn't be working nights in warehouses." He paused. "He starts school next week." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She shook her head, overwhelmed. "I can't accept this," she said weakly. "It's too much." "You can," Victor replied. "And you will." His tone left no room for refusal. "This isn't charity. It's correction." She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she nodded, tears spilling despite her attempt to remain composed. Victor looked away, discomfort flickering across his face. Gratitude unsettled him. It created bonds he preferred not to acknowledge. When she left the office, clutching the folder to her chest, the world felt unsteady, as if her reality had shifted on its axis. The staff noticed immediately. Whispers traveled in the quiet spaces between rooms. The maid who had once been invisible now carried herself with a fragile confidence, her steps more assured. People wondered what she had seen, what she had said, what secret had earned her such favor. No one dared ask her directly. That evening, Victor stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the sky painted in shades of orange and gray as the sun dipped below the horizon. Marco joined him, hands clasped behind his back. "It's done," Marco said quietly. "The landlord won't be a problem again, and the neighborhood understands." Victor nodded, eyes fixed on the distant lights flickering on one by one. "Good," he said. "Make sure it stays that way." Marco hesitated, then spoke carefully. "You didn't have to get involved." Victor's jaw tightened. "I know," he said. "That's the point." Below them, the city pulsed, indifferent and relentless. Victor had spent his life shaping it through fear and control, bending it to his will. Yet in this small act, he felt something unfamiliar, a sense that power, when used deliberately, could restore balance rather than destroy it. He did not dwell on the thought. Dwelling led to doubt. Doubt led to weakness. Elena finished her shift that night with a strange calm settling over her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was not defined solely by survival. As she left the mansion, the guards opened the gate with quiet respect. She glanced back once, the building glowing behind her, and understood that by noticing her pain, Victor Morano had changed more than one life. He had reminded everyone watching that even in a world built on fear, there were lines that could not be crossed without consequence. The days that followed unfolded with a strange, almost fragile calm, as if the mansion itself were adjusting to an invisible shift in gravity. Elena moved through her routines with growing confidence, her wrist healing steadily, the splint a constant but no longer overwhelming presence. The pain had softened into an ache, and with it, the fear that had once tightened her chest every morning began to loosen. She still worked quietly, still kept her eyes lowered, but something within her had changed. She no longer felt like she might disappear if someone looked at her too closely. The staff sensed it too. Conversations paused when she entered rooms, not out of suspicion, but out of a new, careful respect. No one mocked her injury. No one questioned her lighter duties. In a house ruled by unspoken laws, those silences spoke louder than words. Victor watched these changes without comment. He had returned to his usual rhythm: meetings, calls, decisions that carried weight far beyond the mansion walls. To the outside world, nothing had changed. He remained the man people feared, the name spoken carefully, the presence that commanded obedience. Yet privately, something had settled within him. He found himself noticing small things more often: the way staff avoided certain hallways when tired, the tension in voices when money was discussed, the quiet resilience of those who endured without complaint. It irritated him at first. Awareness bred responsibility, and responsibility complicated power. Still, he did nothing to stop it. One evening, Elena was finishing her shift when Victor called her into the main hall. She approached slowly, heart beating faster, old instincts rising despite everything that had happened. Victor stood near the window, city lights reflecting faintly in the glass. He turned as she stopped a few steps away. "Your wrist?" he asked. "It's healing well, sir," she replied. "The doctor says I'll regain full strength." He nodded, satisfied. "Good." There was a pause. Then he added, "You'll receive a raise. Effective immediately." Her breath caught. "Sir, I consider it compensation," he said, cutting her off. "For time you shouldn't have lost." Tears threatened again, but this time she held them back. "Thank you," she said softly. He studied her for a moment, then turned back to the window, signaling the conversation was over. Elena left, her steps light, her thoughts racing. That night, she went home to find Tomas waiting, excitement shining in his eyes as he talked about his first week at school, about books and teachers and plans that stretched beyond the narrow limits they had always known. Elena listened, smiling through tears, understanding that whatever Victor Morano's reasons had been, their lives were no longer trapped in the same small circle of fear. Weeks passed. The story spread beyond the mansion, reshaped by whispers and imagination. In the neighborhood where Elena lived, people spoke of a warning delivered in the night, of a landlord who vanished without explanation, of an invisible line that had suddenly been drawn. Abuse quieted. Doors stayed closed. Power had spoken, not loudly, but clearly. Those who understood listened. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Victor stood once more on his balcony, watching the city breathe beneath him. Marco joined him, silent as always. "People are talking," Marco said. "They say you've gone soft." Victor exhaled slowly, the hint of a smile touching his lips. "Let them," he replied. "Soft men don't survive long. Just men who choose where to apply pressure." Marco nodded, understanding. The city had not become kinder. It had simply been reminded that cruelty carried consequences. Inside, Elena finished her work and prepared to leave. She paused at the doorway, glancing back at the vast room that had once felt like a cage and now felt, if not safe, then balanced. She knew better than to mistake Victor Morano for a hero. He was a dangerous man, shaped by a dangerous world. But he was also a man who noticed, who acted, and who drew lines others feared to cross. That knowledge changed everything. As night fell, the mansion settled into its quiet vigilance. Victor returned to his study, the city's glow framing him in shadow and light. He poured a drink, lifting the glass thoughtfully. In noticing one broken wrist, he had altered more than a single fate. He had sent a message through the veins of the city, a reminder that power could be used to correct as well as to dominate. It was not redemption. He did not seek that. It was order. By morning, the effects were undeniable. Elena woke without dread. Tomas walked toward a future once unimaginable, and the city carried on with a subtle awareness that something had shifted. Those who lived in its darker corners understood that sometimes shock did not come from violence alone, but from restraint, from intervention, from the unexpected choice to protect rather than destroy. And in that understanding, a quiet, enduring change took root, unseen but powerful, shaping lives long after the whispers faded.